And welcome back to the show. It has been great being back here in the chair at News Talk 1010. We have a lot of terrific stuff coming up this evening. After 9 o'clock, we're going to talk about how you make money posting on social media. Not everyone can do it, but a lot of people, bloggers and people who are YouTubers and stuff, they're making a lot of money. And Jessica Thomas Cook is a founder and director of talent for Wanderlust Management, and she works with some of these people, and she'll tell us exactly how that works. If you've ever wondered, we're going to find out after 9 o'clock. But right now we are going to talk about Canadian women climbing the corporate ladder. Apparently some of them are still hesitant to do it. We're going to talk about what women really want in the workplace. My guest right now in studio is Jennifer Reynolds. She's president and CEO of Women in Capital Markets and a good friend of the Nightside. Welcome back to the show, Jennifer.
Thanks, Barbara. I'm delighted to be here.
It's great to see you. Terrific to see you. And lots of stuff to go over. But let's start with something you just asked me about before we came on the air, because I was away last week and I missed this study about companies disclosing whether or not women are on their boards. So what was the study actually?
Well, there was some new disclosure that the OSC put into place for 2015. So companies had to report on how many women they had on their board and how many women they had in senior management. They had to also disclose, do they have a policy for trying to increase the proportion of women in those two areas? And then do they have targets for that as well? And so the first sort of wave has come out now, and so we had 71% of companies had reported thus far since being subject to this new disclosure. And the study found, it was by Torys, a legal firm, found that only just under half actually had no policy whatsoever. So essentially, I think the message there is that close to half said, well, you know, we don't really think that's all that important, and we don't need a policy, and we haven't spent much time as a board really thinking about how are we going to increase the proportion of women on our board and in senior management. And just to give you, you know, an idea of how many companies, you know, have no women, 40% of those public companies have no women on their board.
That's amazing.
Yeah, in this day and age, it really is a shocking figure. You know, these are some of the largest companies in our economy with absolutely no representation of women on their board.
So when we look at this topic, are we sort of saying or thinking, you know, just by the nature of things and people advancing in their careers, there should be some representation of women?
You would think, yeah. I mean, women have been over 50% of the graduates now for 30 years. So
wow.
We also earn about half of, you know, all master's degrees in business and administration. So, you know, you can't say that we're going to outgrow this, right, as different generations sort of work.
Because it would have happened by now.
Would have happened by now. I mean, certainly my generation should have seen that happen. And it hasn't. And so, you know, you have to at that point say, what are we going to do? First of all, what's wrong with the system here? Like something structurally is going on because we're churning out, you know, really smart, educated women who are going into professional fields and are filling middle management roles. But, you know, whether you call it the glass ceiling or whether you call it, you know, the sticky floor, they're not moving past that point.
That's funny. And, you know, what does that then tell you, this study that just came out, aside from the fact that companies, we don't have that representation, but do you think there's a resentment on behalf of some companies feeling like, well, why are we being told what to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two things. I think it might be a bit of resentment saying, listen, you know, we know how to run our company.
Yeah.
We run this on a meritocracy, and our meritocracy works. And then I think there's also just a little bit of laziness, inertia, thinking, you know, that's a complicated problem. Let's just do things the way we've done them in the past and, you know, kind of putting your head in the sand a little bit. So
meritocracy is people moving up based on merit.
Yeah, their abilities. Solely, you know, that assumes that everybody can be judged completely objectively.
So it would seem that the women are really underperforming in those companies.
You know, if you look at the numbers in senior management, that's exactly the conclusion you would have to come to if the meritocracy is really functioning correctly.
And that makes no sense.
No, because we know that women are outperforming in academia, like in their, you know, university programming. So if they're coming out, you know, in similar or higher achievement levels in university and in master's degrees, it does, you know, why all of a sudden is that performance not translating in the workplace? And so So no, I mean, I don't believe there's just a bunch of women out there underperforming in their jobs. It's not that simple. I think there's a lot of things going on. I think that, there are sort of just structural, cultural norms in the workplace that aren't so friendly to women. And part of that is around, everyone always sort of dirts to work-life balance. Part of it is absolutely about that. But part of it is just, unconscious bias and people gravitating towards people like themselves for teams, for projects. So you're picking those teams over and over with the same kinds of people who you like, who are kind of like you. Mm-hmm. And those people are getting all the great experience. And then when it comes to promotion time, those people have better qualifications, perhaps, than some of the women who maybe didn't get on those deals or develop those relationships. So it's really this subtle thing that happens over your career. I think when you're junior and you're in a role where it's really technical, let's say. And so, you do something technical at your desk, you go deliver your report or whatever it is, and, everybody looks kind of even at that point, right? But it becomes harder when it's about building relationships internally, externally with clients, and as I said, getting exposure to experience in your company and in your industry and getting exposure to senior executives. Jennifer
Reynolds is my guest. She's the president and CEO of Women in Capital Markets. When you tell people what you do you ever get any kind of pushback? Do you know what I mean by that?
In terms of my roles in advocacy right now or in the capital markets?
Probably in terms of advocating on behalf of women and why companies and boards need to have more female representation. Because whenever I bring up this topic, I get texts from people saying, it's just sort of like, why do we need? Mm-hmm. Why do we need more women? Why aren't you guys happy? Just this sort of pushback.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think it goes to the interesting topic, one I find interesting about, feminism and do we really need it anymore? And, have we already sort of achieved everything we needed to achieve? And so, I guess some people have the perspective that, it is a level playing field. Stop whining and,
Stop whining. That's what it is. That's the sort of sense I get whenever we talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think there is some of that out there. I like to think that's a lack of understanding of the issues and not, were they to really see the inequalities that are going on and the things that are going on, they might have a different perspective. But the reality is we're at a stage, as we were talking about earlier, it's not going to just change. And the issue with that is why should you care? Why should we care if it changes? We're really depriving ourselves and we're depriving our economy of a vast pool of talent. Because women, all these educated women, 60% of university graduates who are coming out of school, if we continue on the path we've been on, they're not going to ever see leadership roles in the economy and get to play, make key decisions that are going to impact the world around us. And so that just means that when we're looking at the next pool of leaders, we're only looking at 50% of the population, really.
Interesting. We're going to continue on this discussion, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to give us a call at 416-872-1010, Star Talk, star 8255. Text us at 71010. Jennifer Reynolds, my guest, President and CEO, Women in Capital Markets. You're listening to The Night Side. Welcome back to the show. Barb DiGiulio, my guest this hour is Jennifer Reynolds. She is the President and CEO of Women in Capital Markets. We're talking about women climbing the corporate ladder. Jennifer was mentioning a study that came out last week in terms of companies disclosing whether or not only women are on their boards, but if they've got programs in place to make sure, because this is now something that companies are being forced to look at. And you said 40% of boards in Canada have no women on them. So the topic, right before you came on the last half hour, we were talking about stay-at-home dads, and I was asking people to call in if they've had experience with that. And one of our callers had said something that I thought would be interesting to raise with you. Mm-hmm. So Mike was the caller, and Mark Tang has some of that call for us to listen to.
If a lot of women are in the workforce, there's just not enough jobs for men. And I don't understand why there's a stigma against stay-at-home dads if women are taking all the jobs.
Are women taking all the jobs? And that's, I don't know if he meant that's why men are stay at home, or that's why there's a stigma against men being stay at home. And as I said, I kept repeating back to him what he was saying, and he kept saying, no, that's not what I'm saying. And I don't know if that wasn't what he was saying, or he just didn't like the way it sounded repeated back to him, because I think I was just repeating back what he was saying.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds exactly what you were just saying. I mean, it sounds like he's saying that men don't have jobs because women now are going into the workforce and taking those jobs, so now they have to stay at home. I think that's what I took away from that. I couldn't disagree more, obviously. I don't think that, the number of women women are going into the workforce and now all of a sudden there's a bunch of men who are exiting and leaving because they're taking all of their jobs. I mean, we were just discussing earlier, they're certainly not taking their jobs at the more senior levels because we don't have any women, or we have very few women at the senior levels. So this is not, I mean, to simplify, the economic issues that have gone on globally, and certainly there has been significant job loss in many industries in this country, but it surely has not been due to the fact that we've had this massive influx of women going into those areas.
And all those men being let go and then becoming stay-at-home dads. Actually, yeah. I don't think that is how most men end up being stay-at-home dads. I don't think it's because they've lost their jobs, probably not lost their jobs to these women who are advancing in the workforce.
No,
okay.
I mean, I think that, these types of, when people make decisions, it makes sense to their family, whether it's the man who stays home or the woman who stays home, and that's the reality today.
Let me read this text to you on our text board at 71010. And, of course, people are welcome if you have questions, comments, 416-872-1010. Star Talk, star 8255. Text us at 71010. Jennifer Reynolds is here, President and CEO of Women in Capital Markets. Okay, Jennifer, here is a text at 71010. I think you two are thinking it's worse than it is. I work in the corporate show industry, big companies and banks. Most of the heads to these places are women, and a good majority of the execs are women. I just did the Canadian Payroll Convention, and 85% of the people in these meetings of 1,000 are women in charge. Don't get me wrong, there are those ones where the old white male rules. I've seen it, but it's not that bad.
Well, I think there are pockets where women are doing better. And I think in the financial industry, that is one of the leaders in terms of they've done a lot of work around trying to get more women in leadership roles. So there's been some progress there. Where we're really seeing the most progress in terms of, I'm talking the most senior levels, are in areas where, sort of support operational things like, the chief human resources officer, chief legal counsel, those types of things. Where we're not seeing the progress, whether, quite frankly, even in the financial industry or otherwise, is women heading up businesses or business units within larger companies where they have profit and loss responsibilities. The importance of that is that those are the jobs that lead to the most senior roles, and those are the ones certainly to the CEO chair, but they really lead to the more senior roles. So we're seeing progress somewhere, but we have a long, long way to go. And certainly, I haven't been in any boardrooms recently where it's been 85% women.
Are there certain industries that are more on board with this?
Yes.
Yeah, really? And so can you, what are some of those where it is a more friendly environment in terms of advancing both men and women?
Yeah, I just think, I do think the financial industry has just been at this a little bit longer. I mean, they're highly regulated, so, and they also do tend to lead when it comes to disclosure. So, we would expect them to lead on this front as well with this new disclosure around, women on boards and women in senior management. So they've been at this a bit longer around looking at what are those systemic issues I was talking about earlier that are holding women back. How can we create work environments that are a little bit different? I won't tell you that they've sort of, solved the problem and have, the magic potion or whatever to solve this issue in corporate Canada. I just will say that they're a little bit further along, certainly than some of the, male-dominated industries like mining or utility or things like that. So there are certain companies who are just further along in their thinking in some of the programs that they've put into place, but we still have a long way to go before we see the numbers at the top really changing significantly.
What are some of the issues that are holding women back?
Well, I mean, I think, I was talking a little bit earlier about just some of the things that sort of happen naturally in the workplace because of the way things work, i.e. The way people pick teams and the way that people are promoted. And we haven't really had sort of more formal talent management, let's call it. People go into jobs, they graduate from the MBA. Women do get paid less right off the bat.
They do, right? I read that today.
Yeah.
Something like an average of almost 10,000.
Yeah, almost 10,000. It's actually like double in Canada what it is in other places, which, I don't know the reason for that, but it's much higher here. So right off the bat, they're going into roles getting paid less. Can
I stop you there? Because that I get that, but in a way it doesn't make sense to me. Because if you're in the hiring position, is it like, if a man is the candidate that we choose to go with, we're going to pay him more? Or is it just something that's systemic and it's not out there?
I think there's probably two things going on. I think, I hope that the majority of it is not that they just put higher offers on the table for equally qualified people for men versus women. I do know from the research that men negotiate more than women right off the bat. So whether they're coming out of MBA school or they're getting, a raise or those sorts of things, they are far more aggressive about negotiating for their salary. I think the stats anywhere from sort of 65 to 70% of men will negotiate. Women, in around 15 to 20%. So much, much lower. That catches up with you. If men are constantly negotiating for more and willing to question that over their career, if you look at MBAs suddenly 15 years later to 20 years later, their compensation now is 40% lower.
Wow.
So it just, it catches up. It's huge. So you've got to be willing to do that. Now, that isn't solely about negotiation. It is about, did they get the right experience over that period? Did they get exposure to senior management? Did they get on the right projects? All those sorts of things that really help to pull you along in your career. But it's significant.
Okay, so we are going to take a break. When we come back, I want to delve into that a little bit. I want to talk about the responsibility that women have in these positions and so we're not just, it's not a blame game. There's part of it is women perhaps could be doing more for themselves. We'll talk about that and lots more. Jennifer Reynolds is here, President and CEO, Women in Capital Markets. It's always an interesting conversation. Welcome back to the show. Jennifer Reynolds is my guest, President and CEO, Women in Capital Markets. We're talking about women climbing the corporate ladder, why it is not happening in 40% of companies in Canada. On their boards, there are no women, which seems very hard to believe when you said, for the last 30 years, it's been 50-50 men and women graduating?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not, is there a pool of very educated, professional women out there? That is not the issue, and people need to get past that. And the other thing they have to get past is thinking that, all of these women suddenly went home and aren't working. Because often that's the association people make. They think, well, they're not in leadership roles because they must have decided to go home.
You mean like to raise their kids?
To raise their children.
Stay at home? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But, in Canada, 90% of working mothers, go back to work within 1 year. So they are going back to work. They may go to different places, but the reality is they're working. And 73%